Thank you, Abby. Indeed, members of the network and justice practitioners around the world are faced with challenges: funding cuts and freezes, restriction on freedom of speech, disinformation, security risks. Grassroots justice defenders have always been at the front lines of defending and deepening democracy. And over the years, they've had in depth experience in working and winning in the most unfavorable circumstances. How can we continue to defend democracy and build power in challenging times? That's the big question for all of us. And today we come together and we learn from each other. In this event, you will hear directly from three distinguished grassroots activists about how they have successfully fought authoritarianism in the past and until the present times. Our speakers will share examples of strategies that they have used together with their communities to respond to authoritative states successfully, how they challenged repressive laws, kept people safe, organized people, defended rights, and sought justice under difficult contexts. I'm very excited to start. We have more than 70 participants now, and a few people are still joining. And let me introduce our three lead discussants. First, we have Evashni Naidu. Evashni is a qualified attorney and has been with Black Sash since 2007. She has a master's degree in law and is a specialist in constitutional law. Some of her early achievements include working on the Same-Sex Marriage Act passed in South Africa, and she currently specializes in issues related to social and economic justice. With a passion for human rights, Evashni brings 22 years of experience in working at grassroots with communities. So Evashni has chosen the path of justice through civil society rather than working in a law firm, and lives by the motto of Black Sash, which is making human rights real, by working in grassroots communities, ensuring that these voices are amplified at the highest levels of government. Whether it's monitoring government service delivery, facilitating human rights related information sessions, or lobbying for policy change, Evashni's dedication to excellence continues to motivate her daily in her work. So welcome everyone. Please welcome Evashni Naidu. Evashni. Next, we have Hector Soliman. Hector is a public interest lawyer with 44 years of experience with government, non-governmental legal service organizations, the private sector, international development organizations, and the academe. He is currently the senior advisor on access to justice in the Justice Sector Reform Program, Governance in Justice Project, or GoJust 2 in the Philippines, implemented by the British Council and the United Nations Office for Project Services. And the project is funded by the European Union. It has a project period of 2021 until this year. Hector is mainly responsible for managing a grant program for civil society organizations and the law schools to promote legal empowerment, alternative dispute resolution, and clinical legal education. Hector finished his Bachelor of Laws at the University of the Philippines in 1980. He's a member of the Philippine Bar since 1981. He graduated from Harvard Kennedy School in 1998 with a Master in Public Administration. He has served in a number of different capacities in both government, the University of the Philippines Law School, Law Center, and in different organizations. And I would mention that Hector is one of the pioneers who facilitated the formation of the alternative law groups, a coalition of legal organizations, legal service, legal empowerment organizations in the Philippines as early as 1990s. Welcome, Hector, and thank you for joining us. Next, we have Denise Dora. Denise is a lawyer and human rights activist with 30 years of experience on gender and access to justice in Brazil. She's a founding member of TENIS, Gender Justice and Human Rights, a feminist organization that develops legal empowerment programs for women community leaderships since 1993. Denise holds an LLM in International Human Rights Law from University of Essex, UK, an MA in History and Politics from the Getulio Vargas Foundation in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and is a PhD candidate at UFRGS PPG Public Policy since 2024. Denise has worked for the Ford Foundation as a senior program officer responsible for the human rights program in Brazil from the year 2000 to 2011. She served on the Brazil Human Rights Fund Board of Directors and the Civil Society Advisory Committee of UN Women in Latin America and Caribbean, and as regional director of South Africa Article 19, an international freedom of expression organization. Denise is a member of the Grassroots Justice Network's Network Advisory Council, and she has been active in activities of the Grassroots Justice Network. She's also currently a board member of Ibirapitanga Institute and Amnesty International Brazil. Again, I'm delighted to have the three lead discussants, Evashni, Hector, and Denise. And as you can see, we have decades of experience in the room today. Okay, before we go to our discussion, we will launch a quick poll, and we would like to understand how participants who are on this call are affected by growing authoritarianism. Are we ready with the poll? Okay. So you can see the poll in different languages. Please take time to answer the poll. There are two questions. Let me know if you're ready to share the results of the poll. Okay. Can you see the results? Okay, that's so question number one. Has your work been affected by repressive policies? So we have 90%. 90% of our participants answering yes. C, we seem. Second question, can you show the results? Can we go to the second? I'm not seeing the second poll question. Do we have it? Okay. I can see. So we have question number two. So please take time to answer question number two. I can still see people are voting. Okay, let's have a few more minutes. Okay. So let's end the poll and share the results. Okay, as you can see, we have a variety of different repressive tactics that had been experienced by the participants, no? And we are now more than 80 in the room. Okay, thank you, and we are continuing to monitor the situation from different countries and asking grassroots justice practitioners, network members regularly is something that we want to do to monitor the situation on the ground. Okay, we're ready. We're ready to start. And I will now call on Evashni first. Evashni, could you tell us something about the long history, the long and colorful history of the Black Sash in South Africa and how you've won in many struggles. Okay, over to you, Vashni.
Position in society to highlight injustice. It was a powerful anti-apartheid organization for 40 years. However, in 1995, the membership base of the organization transitioned to become a non-governmental organization, but maintaining the core values of our founders, which was non-violence, human rights, and justice. This year, Black Sash celebrates its platinum jubilee. We're turning 70 years old. And for these many years, we have defended the rule of law and the values of an independent constitutional democracy where human rights are real. The work of Black Sash showcases 70 years of fighting for an anti-racist, capable state that guarantees human rights and ensures social protection for everyone in South Africa. And how did we do this? We used a variety of strategies that amplified and changed over the years in terms of the fight for democracy. But for the purposes of this call, I'm only going to reflect on three of them. And in particular, I'm going to speak to and do a little bit of a deep dive into legal advocacy, political engagement, and peaceful protests. So in terms of legal advocacy, something that resonates with all of us probably on this call is the fact that Black Sash started legal advice offices as a cornerstone of our advocacy during the anti-apartheid era, where we provided free legal assistance to non-white South Africans who were affected by the discriminatory laws in South Africa at the time. In terms of the advice offices, some of the things that we used to do was legal guidance. We helped individuals to navigate oppressive laws, particularly the past laws, housing regulations, pensions, and labor rights, which were affecting communities at the time. We also provided support for detained individuals. Many South Africans were arrested under the apartheid legislation. Black Sash provided legal aid assistance to those facing unjust detention. Community education was also at the core of our legal advice offices. The offices conducted rights awareness campaigns, ensuring that people understood their legal standing and what their options were in fighting the unjust laws of the country. We also had to collaborate with lawyers because obviously our advice offices do not have legal practitioners based in them. And so we worked closely with human rights lawyers to challenge the unjust policies and to provide legal representation for people during that time. And one of the core things about Black Sash was that we founded the first legal advice office in Athlone during the start of our legal empowerment, and it's established in Cape Town. And over time, we expanded our network and we set up urban offices across the urban centers where we had regional structures. These offices were staffed mainly by volunteers with interpreters from local townships to assist with the language barriers. And the work at the time was obviously instrumental in protecting vulnerable communities and exposing the injustices of apartheid. In terms of political engagement, with regard to our political engagement strategy during the apartheid era, this evolved from defending the Constitution, which we knew was a breach of the rights of the majority of our people, and it actually evolved into downright and direct activism, advocacy, as well as alliance building. This approach combined nonviolent resistance, legal interventions, and strategic partnerships to challenge systemic oppression. Some of the key strategies that we used within political engagement was silent protests and public demonstrations, and I'll do a little bit more of a dive in that as well. And here it's our Black Sash members used to stage silent vigils outside government buildings wearing our black sashes to symbolize mourning for democracy. These protests were a powerful visual statement against the apartheid policies. We also used legislative monitoring and advocacy, and the organization closely tracked government policies, exposing injustices and advocating for legal reforms. We also published reports and we engaged policymakers to push for change. We also used the engagement of support for the Freedom Charter. So over time, Black Sash aligned ourselves with Charterist principles and recognizing that the Freedom Charter was a viable alternative to violent resistance. This marked a shift for Black Sash from liberal constitutionalism to broader human rights advocacy. We also collaborated with other anti-apartheid movements. So we worked alongside activist groups, legal organizations, and political movements to amplify resistance efforts. We supported campaigns like the End Conscription campaign because in the past, white young men had to join the army as part of the conscription campaign in South Africa, and also the mass democratic movement. In terms of our advice offices, which I spoke to above, we were a hub for political resistance and also for assisting individuals who were affected by the apartheid laws, but also to document the systemic abuses that they suffered under the regime at the time. And a huge factor is international advocacy, which we've seen from our colleagues in Kenya, from our colleagues in Bangladesh, etc. Black Sash leveraged global networks to raise awareness about apartheid, influencing international pressure on the South African government. And our commitment to non-racialism and civil liberties made us a vital force against South Africa's political landscape. Whilst we initially focused on the constitutional defense, we then expanded obviously into human rights advocacy, as well as direct political activism, which shaped our broader anti-apartheid strategy. And then finally, the last strategy that I want to do a deep dive into is around peaceful protests. Our form of peaceful protest manifested in silent protests, which was a defining feature of our resistance against apartheid. These protests were dignified, non-violent demonstrations where our members stood in public spaces wearing the black sashes to symbolize the mourning for democracy. And how these protests work. We chose strategic locations, and so our members staged protests as outside government buildings, courts, and public spaces to draw attention to the unjust laws of the land. In terms of symbolism, our black sash was a powerful visual statement which represented the death of the constitutional rights of the people of our country. Persistence was also one of the major major characteristics of our peaceful protests, because even when our group protests were banned, the members continued one-woman vigils, standing alone with placards to maintain their visibility. Public reaction was also huge in terms of the peaceful protests. While some of the passers-by obviously supported what Black Sash stood for, others obviously jeered or intimidated people. And some of our members were even assaulted during these protests. However, Black Sash remained committed to peaceful resistance. And the impact of these silent protests, we were able to raise awareness. So our protests kept the apartheid injustices in the public eye and forced South Africans to confront the reality of systemic oppression. We influenced policy debates by consistently challenging discriminatory laws. Black Sash continued to contribute to legal and political discourse on civil rights. We also inspired other movements. So in terms of our nonviolent resistance, it influenced the broader anti-apartheid activism, which showed the power of symbolic protest. And lastly, in terms of international attention, as I said, our dignified stance helped to garner global support, which added pressure on the South African government. And despite the fact that we faced harassment, restrictions, and even attack, Black Sash's silent protest remained a powerful tool of resistance, which also reinforced our reputation at the time as what Nelson Mandela himself called the conscience of white South Africa. And I'll leave it there for now, and to allow the rest of my colleagues to also expand. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Evashni. Wow, 70 years. 70 years of activism, and congratulations to Black Sash. Happy anniversary. And I see many parallels with the Philippines. If South Africa has Black Sash, the Philippines has the yellow ribbon, and I'm sure Hector will be willing to share his participation in the yellow ribbon movement in the Philippines back in the days of the dictatorship under Ferdinand Marcos, and until now. So again, thank you, Evashni. I will call on Hector over to the Philippines and over to you with our experience of people power. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Marlon, and greetings to everybody. For the next 10 minutes, allow me to be the voice of those who have struggled against authoritarianism and draw lessons for our reflection. Why is it important to discuss authoritarianism? Sadly, in the Philippine context, authoritarianism has led to unaccountable power, which has led to economic plunder. And in order to shut out the people calling for accountability, gross human rights violations have occurred. I'll try to provide a perspective of the rise and fall of authoritarianism from 1970s to the present time, a period of some 55 years. The 70s to the 80s have been characterized by martial law, declared by then President Marcos on the pretext of controlling the resurgence of communism. The dictator ruled by decree, which by constitutional amendment became part of the law of the land. Mr. Marcos immediately imprisoned key opposition leaders like Senator Benigno Aquino and Senator Jose Diokno, and countless other students, clergy, and activists. According to the Human Rights Claims Board, a government agency tasked to provide reparations to victims, the approved claims totaled to 2,326 killed or disappeared, 2,104 tortured, and 3,355 detained. And these are just the people who have come forward to make a formal claim to the government. The martial law era ended with the People Power Revolution in 1986. And this is the one that Marlon has adverted to as the Yellow Ribbon Revolution, a non-violent effort at the overthrow of the dictatorship, triggered by the assassination of Senator Benigno Aquino upon his return from the US in August of 1983. After the flight of the dictator to the US in February of 1986, Corazon Aquino was proclaimed president, and the country went into a rapid transformation politically and economically in order to alleviate widespread poverty and to address a mangled legal regime that the dictator has left behind. The 1987 Constitution was basically an anti-dictatorship constitution that guaranteed not only civil and political rights, but also social, economic, and cultural rights. The period of 1986 to the year 2016 was a period of relative calm, punctuated by the ouster of then President Estrada for graft and corruption. The country was again plunged into authoritarian mode during the reign of President Rodrigo Duterte from 2016 to 2022. This period witnessed the heightened extrajudicial killings in the name of the war on drugs, which by the accounts of the Human Rights Watch totaled to around 12,000 extrajudicial killings. Due to the extreme impunity resulting in drug-related killings, the supporters of the victims moved quickly to file a case with the International Criminal Court. Fast forward to 2025, former President Duterte has recently been detained in The Hague by virtue of a warrant of arrest issued by the International Criminal Court for alleged crimes against humanity. His trial date has been set for September of 2025. Even more recently, in the midterm elections of May 2025, we have seen the return of progressive legislators like Kiko Pangilinan and Bam Aquino. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Former Senator Laila de Lima, who has been incarcerated by then President Duterte on what I believe are trumped-up drug charges, has now won a seat in the House of Representatives. Jose Manuel Diokno, the son of former Senator Jose W. Diokno, who was one among the first to be detained during martial law, has also been elected to the House of Representatives. So how does one combat authoritarianism? And what lessons have we learned in the 55-year time span? Number one, do not despair. For the darker the regime, the more brilliant the candles of hope will glimmer. It took 14 years for martial law to be effectively dismantled. The human rights community, grassroots organizations, and the church were at the forefront of holding the regime accountable. It has taken 9 years for the case build-up leading to the arrest of former President Duterte. It has taken 7 years for former Senator Laila de Lima to be freed from prison. Truly, when basic human rights are being denied, the light will shine through, and the people will take action. Number two, a change of leaders has to be accompanied by a process of building the institutions of democracy and its acculturation in the lives of ordinary people. The assumption of Cory Aquino into power and the passage of the 1987 Constitution has created a wide open space for democratic rebuilding. The 1987 Constitution became a platform for progressive legislation, which sought to implement the diverse civil, political, social, and economic rights. This was accompanied by the organization of varied public interest law groups advocating for change. of which Marlon and I belong to. That trend of progressive legislation has also seen the passage of a law on crimes against humanity, which was the basis for the detention of former President Duterte. But even with some 30 years of progressive legislation, we now realize that this is only the first step in the realization of these rights. So much more has to be done in terms of rights awareness, good governance at the national and local levels to effectively implement these rights. Number 3, fostering a culture for the respect of human rights and the rule of law is a lifelong struggle. Many people have asked, how come the country is still struggling to recover the millions of dollars of stolen wealth of the Marcos family? How come when former President Duterte made jokes about raping women, it elicited laughter from the crowd? How come the trend of electing political dynasties into office seems to be generally on the rise and not in its decline? All of these questions point to the fact that the enculturation of the respect for human rights, good governance, and the rule of law will take a long time and is a daily struggle in many fronts. In my present work, it is very surprising to know that many people still do not have a birth certificate, which is a gateway legal document for the delivery of basic social services like education and health. Number 4, similar to Black Sash, our mantra is organize, organize, organize. In the workplace, in the communities, in the schools, but also in cyberspace. In the 1970s, when martial law was at its height, the opposition was driven underground. Opposition leaders were in exile. Other souls opted for organizing community groups to oppose the dictatorship. But the final pushback that brought the Marcos dictatorship over the edge was the mass mobilization of opposition groups that blossomed in the aftermath of the assassination of then Senator Benigno Aquino. When the Duterte regime started the bloodbath of extrajudicial killings, the people have again realized that the hard-earned gains of respect for the rule of law were being eroded. The pushback came in the form of a coalition of families and victims of extrajudicial killings, sympathetic lawyers, religious organizations, and political leaders. The ICC became the platform of accountability. This coalition has successfully built a case enough for the ICC to arrest former President Duterte, which highlights the importance of finding the proper forum in the fight against authoritarianism. The elections of May 2025 is another story. The outcome is the election of progressive candidates who have led in the fight against authoritarianism. Because of the lingering influence of the Marcos and Duterte families, it is my firm belief that the people are looking for clear alternatives. Significantly, this election was a combination of traditional campaigns through house-to-house visits and town hall meetings, coupled with the creation of virtual communities through social media. The battle was not only in the streets, but also in cyberspace, in the corridors of Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. The youth came out in droves during the last election. It is high time that we think of organizing not only grassroots communities, but also virtual communities. In conclusion, I pay homage to the people who gave up their lives in the fight against authoritarianism. I quote from the late Leon Alejandro, a student leader who said, "In the line of fire is the place of honor." Truly, the fight against authoritarianism is an honorable task. And as we remember them in our forum today, I hope that we draw inspiration from their efforts to continue the struggle and not let their efforts be in vain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hector. Organize, organize, organize. And Hector made a lot of reference to Duterte, and there's another person who was compared to Duterte, and that's Brazil's Bolsonaro. We will now hear from Denise on how they have organized in uh, in Brazil. So over to you, Denise.
Thank you very much, Marlon. Good morning to everybody. It was very inspiring to hear Hector and Eva before. And I was thinking about the long history of struggle for democracy and human rights and access to justice in all of our countries. In Brazil, it has been a struggle for the last 500 years because it was colonized by Europeans who used a slavery regime to populate the country with lots of massacres against the indigenous communities here, traffic of slaves from Africa. The whole history was really bad. And after 400 years of slavery and monarchy and colony, when finally the country became independent and the republic was established, we had the last 100 years with military regimes, dictatorships. And so the idea of looking back and see how much other generations before us have struggled against authoritarianism and have been changing the situation of our countries is also really inspiring. So when I was thinking about this conversation, I thought maybe it's really important to address some of our lessons from recent experiences to see how this generation, the generation that is here today, that has been struggling for democracy in the last 30 years from the 90s, and was seeing the world in a road to progress somehow, because most of us have experienced battles against dictatorships and have changed the regimes, helped to change the regimes. It is the case of Brazil. No? I was born under a dictatorship, but in 85, the country has changed to a civil regime. And we have experienced the movement of building a new constitutional law, building a strong civil society with NGOs. In the 90s, experience the participation in United Nations conferences, no? The Conference for Women, the Human Rights Conference, the Conference Against Racism and Xenophobia. And so the idea of walking into a progress, a more democratic world was somehow part of this generation. So what I see in Brazil and after 2015, so the last 10 years, is some kind of surprise with the rise, a new wave of authoritarianism, of far-right movements occupying the space of the state, either in the parliament as well as in governments and part of the judiciary. And this was somehow some level of shock for us. I think in this new wave of authoritarianism, which we saw with the first election of Trump in the US, with the impeachment of President Dilma in Brazil in 2016, and also what you have both of you have recently told us here about changes in the countries. We saw this in Hungary and in other countries in the world. So very authoritarian leaders taking the power by elections, truth elections, being elected by the people to be in power, and using this power to suffocate social movements, civil society organizations, but also trying to change all the legislation that was built to protect people's rights. So this is new. And the way that this has been happening using social media, the cyberspace, strong campaigns with lots of fake news, manipulation, etc., is something that in our case in Brazil, we had to stop a little bit to understand. So one of my first reflections is exactly this. Take some time to understand and analyze the context, because this idea of this chaos that these authoritarian leaders create is intentional, is a strategy. Here in Brazil, when Bolsonaro was elected after the impeachment of Dilma and a reorganization of the far-right forces. And Bolsonaro is a military and was a supporter of dictatorship and an openly supporter of torture. So it was the worst possible scenario, and it happened. And so for us, it was important. I remember the election was in November of 2018. And there were two candidates, one from the Workers' Party and Bolsonaro. So for us, it was almost unbelievable that he was elected. But very soon, we had a meeting with several human rights organizations in December 2018 to reorganize our work. So following Hector, I would say organize, but also reorganize ourselves, to understand what's going on, which are their strategies, and how we have to move a little bit from our business, because it is not as usual. Something happened that changed the dynamic, and we have to cope with that. So we had a 2 days meeting in São Paulo with several human rights organizations to think about security of the organizations, how we would protect the staff, and how we would organize ourselves to start fighting against what we saw that would happen. And it happened. Bolsonaro took power in January the 1st. January the 2nd, he tried to change the civil society framework by creating a special position for compliance of NGOs. So in January the 5th, 3 days after, we started a case under the Supreme Court saying this is illegal, it's unconstitutional, and asking for precautionary measures. And that week, we learned that we would need to be prepared to fight at legal level against all of these measures that were administrative measures trying to reduce civic space and reduce access to information and reduce environmental protection and all the things. So this was an important strategy. It came together and prepared ourselves for a long battle that used the law to protect what we have built in the last 30 years in Brazil, from the Constitution to several other regulations. So one of the arenas, and then when I say that we have reorganized ourselves and redefine the scope of our work, is to think about where we can find allies within the the government or the judiciary or the legislative, and start working closely and regularly, consistently with them. And one of the strategies that we used in Brazil was to make sure that every time, it was crazy. It was like a legal case every week, because Bolsonaro was, trying to close everything in the country. But we won most of them. I remember the second big case was he changed the access to information law. So again, we went to the Supreme Court, etc. The idea was not, we had no hope of winning the case after 10 years, but winning precautionary measures, to stopping immediately the damage that they could create. So, and this was something that after some months, we had a group of lawyers, sometimes pro bono lawyers, as part of our coalitions to do it every week. And I think it was important, because in authoritarian moments, we have to protect the rule of law. We have to protect the legislation, the laws, the regulations that we proposed and we participated in the construction. So this was, for us in Brazil, something very important. And then I would go to the third lesson. Don't walk alone. So work in collaboration and coalitions all the time. And this was so important in our case, that some of the movements ended Bolsonaro's years much more stronger than before. And we have to consider that this period of authoritarianism also was coincident with the pandemic. So he started the government in 2019, and the COVID started in March 2020. So we went through these two situations, with difficulties to have personal contact, but that's the idea of working together was so important that we were able to build strong coalitions. For example, the coalition of the Black Coalition for Rights was created in November 2019. In the middle of this, and it grown as a space for Black organizations throughout the country to stay together, to talk, to plan their activities. If we consider the indigenous peoples movement in Brazil that had to be connected, including to fight and to protect themselves against COVID, was really strong to be able to participate in a national coalition. And this has created common strategies in a big country that helped not only the protection of activists, because as we knew who were where, it was much easier to create protection strategies, but also to think together about how to build resistance. I have one example from Article 19, which is the campaign Share Information, Share Health. This idea that we should be connected with popular communicators in the periphery of big cities, in the Amazon region, in the south of Brazil. And Article 19 over the years launched a campaign every year to connect some 20, 30, 50 popular communicators, people who had a blog or a podcast or were doing something in their own territories and could be connected throughout these common campaigns. And one of the examples that I love is one organization in Roraima, in the very north of Brazil, in the border of Venezuela, who for over a year was translated information. It was 2020, the year of COVID, was translating information about COVID and how to protect your health into different indigenous languages. In Brazil, there are more than 100 indigenous languages. So people in the village would receive information in order to protect themselves, and also to build resistance against authoritarian decisions. And in the end, in the fourth lesson that I I would like to share with you was this idea that although we needed to understand and analyze the new context, redefine our strategies, work in collaboration and coalitions, and it was very important to think very openly about how to define strategies. That's why I said a 360 strategy. Think how to help and reinforce strategies from organizations in grassroots organizations living in the middle of the forest, living in the peripheries, women's rights organizations, but also thinking about how you can mobilize parts of the middle class to defend democracy, journalists, editors, artists, campaigning with artists is very important, people who would have some influence in public opinion, and how you can build alliances also with Supreme Court judges and people in the parliament, some 2 or 3 or 4 senators. That's okay, better than nothing. So this idea of moving into different directions and build alliances for supporting democracy, I think it's really important. And this needs obviously some creativity. So one of the things that Themis did during this period was to rethink their courses for legal promoters, for promotoras legales populares. So how it would be possible to keep the program, with the groups of women. And one of the experiences was to do this through WhatsApp network. So most of the courses during 2020 and 2021 was done through WhatsApp, because in Brazil it's very popular. People use it, it's free. And so I remember that we had to prepare, it was a weekly class, and we had to prepare a 2-minute class on constitutional rights. What is a constitution, in an audio, and send, and then a card with some information, very, very simple one, and then a card with some questions for next week. And during the week, people would listen to the audio, read the card, and think about the questions. And in the following week, we would have the class and discuss it in Zoom meetings, with WhatsApp communication, in the way that was possible. The indigenous people's groups also did this through the Amazon region. Some small courses about indigenous rights and how to protect themselves, and the protection of activists, which were something very important, through this WhatsApp small information that in the end formed a long course with fundamental information. In this case, one of these courses, Themis was mobilizing 500 domestic workers around the country through the trade unions in its states. So it had somehow more impact, and it helped a lot to organize in a moment of severe constraints of public space and civic space. So I'm finishing here saying that challenges. So this is our challenge, how to think authoritarianism at this moment in 2025. It's different from the Second World War. It's different from slavery times. It's different from apartheid times. But even though we have to look back and learn from some lessons, also we have to be sure that they did it. They were able to fight it and to sometimes to win. So we can do as well. So this idea of having hope, organize themselves, talk with each other, and keep some level of spirit of resistance and solidarity and compassion and ways of working together. I think it's the most important lesson that we have from all these times.
Thank
That's
you
it.
very
Thank
much. Thank you, Denise. And speaking of WhatsApp, we're live streaming and we're getting some comments from those who are not in the Zoom room but are monitoring us. And we got a WhatsApp comment saying that we're having some very insightful conversations here. And after hearing Evashni, Hector, and Denise, I see some similarities, a number of similarities, but also a number of differences in terms of context, no? And as Denise said, the struggles in the 1960s, 1970s, or even prior to that, are quite different from the struggles that we have now, especially with the youth, with the virtual space. And Hector mentioned that organizing should also be done at the virtual space. Okay, and speaking of virtual space, we reached almost 100. I saw we had more than 100 participants earlier. Okay, so we are now going into the Q&A portion. So we would like to request participants, if you can put your questions in the Q&A section. You can click the three dots at the bottom of your screens, and then select Q&A, and then enter your question so we can see your questions. Okay, and I will start by asking our three lead discussants what are some of the key challenges and lessons learned from the decades of struggles that you've been part of. Just a brief comment on that. Challenges and lessons learned. Who would like to start? Evashni, can we start with you?
No problem. Yes, I think there are definitely similarities, and as Denise rightly said, the struggle for apartheid has shifted in terms of where South Africa currently is now. But definitely we have built as Black Sash on the strategies that we used in the past to influence the work that we currently do now. But just reflecting back on the strategies that we had to use, but the limitations and the challenges that we experienced. Definitely some of them would be limited political influence. So despite our lobbying efforts, Black Sash obviously struggled to directly influence government policies because of the entrenched power of the then ruling National Party. We obviously were limited because of the restriction in protest rights. So legislation was actually passed to ensure that we couldn't protest in groups. So obviously our members then had to use solitary vigils, and this obviously reduced visibility. It reduced the impact of these protests, and it obviously impacted in terms of the reach that we could have, because you obviously would have had far more visibility if you had a larger group. Community backlash. As I shared as we started this conversation, it was white South Africans who were the membership. And obviously they were then viewed by others as traitors in our country because they seemed to be going against the approved regime at the time. So that led to social ostracization as well as physical attacks. And remember, the white women who started this movement were actually very privileged women. Their husbands were lawyers, justices in the courts, etc. So they stood to lose a lot in terms of their prestige, so to speak. Obviously, we also failed to prevent key legislation. So despite our protests, we still found that there were major apartheid laws that were passed, such as the Separate Representation of Voters Bill. And this obviously undermined our early objectives in terms of attacking legislation that we would have wanted to obviously try and prevent. There was also limited reach in terms of Black communities because it was a predominantly white movement at the time, and the people that were affected by the regime was actually Black communities. They perceived the facial, just because it was a white person that was running this, they wouldn't understand what was going on. So there was resistance to possibly working together with Black Sash, and so we couldn't fully integrate into all the grassroots movements at the time. And obviously there were challenges in terms of legal advocacy, despite the fact that that we continued to fight against the oppressive legal system, we still found that laws were passed, and this led to obviously setbacks. But as Denise rightfully said, yes, you organize, but you've got to adapt. You've got to adapt your strategies. You've got to understand the concept, and you've got to pivot what you thought that you would need to do. And also understanding the power of nonviolent resistance. The persistence of that by ensuring that our protests were peaceful, and that we didn't submit to being violent in terms of the way we attacked the regime, also gave us credibility eyes of the outside world as well, which added the further pressure in terms of the international solidarity in terms of breaching through and putting pressure on the government to end apartheid. Let me stop there and allow the other colleagues to probably jump in as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Vashni. And you mentioned nonviolent resistance. I will call on Hec and Hector, as you think about challenges and lessons. I would like you to say a bit more about. We got a question requesting you to say a bit more about the Yellow Ribbon movement and how that had continued until today. So maybe if you can integrate that in your discussion of the challenges and lessons learned.
Yes, thank you, Marlon. I think if you, just like Denise, if you take a kind of a long haul view of history of authoritarianism, you should also take a long haul view of the periods of relative democracy, because I think that there are different tactics and different strategies that one has to employ in order to combat authoritarianism. During the martial law regime, and I'm going now into the kind of the Yellow Ribbon movement, the authoritarianism was so grave. There were torture, disappearances, and killings happening on a daily basis, that the strategies for opposing authoritarianism are actually also very diverse. You have the Communist Party that is doing, underground armed opposition. You have the political leaders in exile exerting international pressure, especially through the US Congress, on the martial law regime. You have on-the-ground groups who are mostly into active nonviolence. I think this is all a combination of different attempts and different strategies that have been successful. But as I said, the trigger point is the assassination of then Senator Benigno Aquino, who was coming back. He was an exiled leader, and he came back from the US to run for a political office, but he was assassinated right there in the airport, and that really kind of was a turning point, a tipping point, so to speak. And the whole Yellow Ribbon movement blossomed because of that. And this was manifested in millions of people, literally millions of people. I was one of them, who were out in the streets and demanding the ouster of the president. And it came to a confrontation, and that was the photo that I showed in my presentation, when the military was actually mobilized in order to quash the millions of people who were out in the streets. But instead of being confronted with Molotov cocktails and bullets, the people confronted them with their bare bodies, with flowers, and with food. That was actually the essence of the nonviolent movement. And the soldiers, surprisingly, even if they were ordered to attack the protesters, could not, in their hearts of hearts, do it because who knows that one of the relatives might be out there. This is the kind of thinking that pervaded during that time. And how can you attack a group of people who are giving you food and flowers? It's a different kind of confrontation altogether. So that is actually one kind of approach. But the other kind of approach, I would say, was especially during the 86 to 2016 period, in a period of relative calm and democracy, there is also the imperative of deepening the institutions of democracy and human rights. Because the other way of fighting authoritarianism is to ensure that people will oppose it when it comes around again. You see, you do not fight authoritarianism only when it is there. You also fight authoritarianism especially when it's not there. Because when Rodrigo Duterte came around and started killing 12,000 people in the name of the drug war, I would say that the efforts that were done by the human rights organizations during the period of relative calm really came together. And they used the International Criminal Court as a fulcrum for securing accountability. And I have to say that I was really very surprised that it ended in the arrest of then President Rodrigo Duterte, and he is still now there in The Hague, waiting for his trial. And my intel has told me that the opposition has already 35 solid cases documented complete with videos and all of that they are going to present as part of the prosecution in order to pin the blame on the crimes against humanity on the former dictator Duterte. So you see, what I'm saying is that the strategies for fighting authoritarianism will actually vary. And one important lesson that I think we have learned is that you should not wait for authoritarianism to come back, because it might come back and we have to be prepared when it does come back. So I think I'll ask Denise to continue the conversation. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Hector. And before we go to Denise, I see two related questions that I would request Denise to address. One is on how you were able to maintain the WhatsApp engagement that you mentioned, and there's another question on engaging the youth. How do you deal with the changing times, from organizing communities in person to using online platforms, especially how the young people plays a vital role in advancing democracy. Could you speak some more about that, about the WhatsApp engagement that you've done successfully?
Sure. Thank you, Marlon, and again, thank you both for the lessons. I do think we have to be alert. At this moment in Brazil, we have elections next year for presidential elections. We are concerned about what's going on, and I think the lessons from the US is something that we have to look at, and also from Hungary, So this is happening, and for me, and I think for all of us, it's very useful to have this conversation, and mapping the international scenario, see what's going on here, there, what is working for these and other countries, and international activism. I think it's very important. I was going to mention that one of our strategies was to have international leaders to recognize the victory of Lula if it happened in the first 3 minutes. We knew that there would be a question about the elections. So it was important to make sure that as soon as the results came, international leaders would recognize and congratulate, etc. And even though we had problems with questioning it, we had to face some movements against the elections after that, but it was important. So I think what Hector just said on, keep doing this is very important. On the case of youth and new ways of communication, that's the part where we have to rethink about the scope of our work, considering that it's not business as usual. There is a new generation of activists, but also with people that are being manipulated by algorithms and, being driven to participate in deepfake networks, and very misogyny ones, stimulated to be very racist, and so this is new, and I think we have to be alert about that also, and be in touch with researchers, and sometimes what we did was to be part of these networks, to have people there being informed about what was going on, but also think in a very creative way of how to use these platforms for good. Because if people are there and young generations are there, you have to communicate. So WhatsApp in Brazil is a free network. You don't have to have data or pay for it. So it's very easy, and it's very popular, and people communicate with their families, professional, etc. So it's a good way to use and keep it doing. And in the case of domestic workers, for example, every place they are, they can use the data, the network from the place, even it's a public space or some house, and there you can communicate in short messages, very focused one. But the idea of keeping the conversation alive, being updating it every week is very important, because then you create a kind of rhythm, a connection that can strain the ties and the alliances that you have there. And the other thing is the idea of bringing artists and public communicators into the work of resistance is very important. For example, we started denouncing, led by Article 19 in Brazil, the persecution against artists. What we've seen against now in the US, persecution against academics, persecution against artists, is very strong. It's this idea of from the authoritarian leaders, let's try to cut the knowledge, creativity, freedom of thought from the scenario. And this is a strategy. You reduce the level of information of people. So one of our important Pacific, I think, peaceful resistance is to mobilize the arts community and journalist community to, keep expressing themselves. And we had a hearing under the Inter-American Commission about artistic freedom in Brazil, and we invited Wagner Moura, who just won the Cannes Prize of Best Actor, and Caetano Veloso, an important singer who was in jail during dictatorship, to come and talk what they were, seeing this new moment. And this was very powerful, I think, to engage public voices coming from the space of liberty, the space of where you can freely speak and paint and sing and make movies. I think it's a very important benchmark about what is authoritarianism and what is democracy. So it's very clear when, the line that makes the difference between two regimes. And just finalize, I think this is important because sometimes the new generations, they are not so aware about what they are going to lose if they open space for authoritarian. For example, young women, do they know that they would lose a lot of rights that were, built in the last 30, 40 years? So how they can think about themselves as protectors of their own rights. This is, I think, it's a strong message that the movement for legal empowerment has an important role to play.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Denise. I'm looking at the time. We have just a few minutes, and we have a list of questions. Very interesting. I will pick one question that I don't want to miss, and I'll ask Denise, Ivashni, and Hector to give us some short answers. And this is about the funding. Earlier we said funding cuts. That's a major challenge for grassroots justice activists now. The question is, did philanthropy or major donors to NGOs play any role in other countries in overcoming authoritarianism? And the second question, is it worth the time to try and organize or influence the donors? Anybody
I can
would like
start.
to? Okay, Denise,
I start.
go ahead, please.
Sure. I think the philanthropic community is made by people like us. Most of them are people who believe in justice, who believe in rights, who believe in democracy. So think about the philanthropic community as part of a democratic community is really important. And build alliances with individuals who are there is also really important because they know the institution. They also they know how to play a role in protecting the grants, in protecting the democracy and democratic programs, etc. So I think the philanthropic community has a role to play. And also, I think we have to look at the new generation of community foundations, local funds, women's rights funds, anti-racist funds, indigenous rights funds, who are, being in place in the last 10, 15 years. So they are still sometimes small, local, but they play a very important role in helping to organize that communities and that territories. So not only think the philanthropy as the big donors, but also see the other layers that are part of the ecosystem and can be very important in these moments.
Thank you. Ivashni? A brief response
Thanks,
to that
Marlon.
question.
Yeah, I agree with Denise, and I think it's also building the relationship with governments in other countries as well who believe in democracy and who want to ensure that democracy is maintained. I think just to say, South Africa doesn't have a genocide going on at the moment. We are all protected by our constitution, despite the fake news that's coming out of America. And that's because we've got philanthropies, but we've also got embassies, we've got governments and political parties in other countries that are willing to build relationships, particularly with organizations in countries that are trying to promote democracy, but try to ensure that democracy also continues with a peaceful transition. And I think that's a lesson that everybody can learn from South Africa. Post our transition to democracy, it was a peaceful transition of power between the apartheid regime and the democratic regime. And the elections last year, 2024, many people foresaw or thought that there was going to be unrest and civil issues in South Africa. But we overcame that, and we then had a peaceful transition into the government of national unity. And that's because of the work that civil society is doing together with government, because of the work and the networks that we've built. And we continue to do on a daily basis. And so I think that relationship is also important, that civil society also realizes that we're a watchdog over government and that people who support our work also understand that and maintain our work in order to do that. Thanks.
Thank you. And last, Hector, who is managing an EU-funded justice program. What can you say about donor
Yes,
support?
Marlon. As I said, I think I'll preface my statement by saying that the fight against authoritarianism takes many forms, both in a confrontational way and both in a deepening way. Um, a lot of the efforts that I've seen, especially those that are very, very political, for example, armed resistance, civil disobedience, and mass mobilizations, a lot of these are really self-funded in a sense, and it's very hard to say because these are very highly political moves, how much money from, quote unquote donors, whoever they are being put into that. I would suspect there are, but I think it's mostly highly funded, self-funded. But on the converse, on the other side, in periods of relative democracy and calm, I think there is a very high interest of the donor community, and that's still in the case here in the Philippines, in the whole process of deepening democratic institutions and respect for the rule of law. I think that one is a a very positive aspect of the fight against authoritarianism, because the deeper the people feel that the rule of law should be respected, the deeper they feel that human rights should be respected, the more easy they will be able to be mobilized when they see that their rights are being violated. So I think that's also a positive step. Um, we are also seeing the possibility that some aspects of government are moving toward this direction. For example, lately, the Supreme Court has come up with a rule on mandatory pro bono legal aid services. You see, 60 hours for every year for all lawyers like me, like Marlon. And this, I think, contributes to the whole movement on the deepening of respect for the rule of law and human rights, because most pro bono legal cases, as we all know, are directed toward protecting the rights of the poor and the vulnerable. So therefore, this is actually another kind of, we have to also look at, I think, the possible contribution of government to the of a mature government to the um, institutionalization and to the building of the respect for the rule of law and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our very enlightening, very thought provoking session. Before we end, I'd like to make an announcement. Abby mentioned that we have a report called the Playbook of Justice. You can see it on your screen. This report will be launched soon. But we wanted to share it as a resource on fighting authoritarianism. It's the product of a series of learning exchanges and conversations convened by the Grassroots Justice Network between grassroots practitioners from 18 countries. The report contains practical strategies that the groups are using to fight repression and authoritarianism, while at the same time building deeper democracy, as what Hector mentioned. The Playbook of Justice is a direct response to the so-called Playbook of Repression that we are seeing. So you will get an alert when the report is officially released. So this time, what you have, we are sharing a copy of the report, but until the official release, please treat this as an advance copy for you only. But we will alert you when we have released the official copy. So again, we thank our very I would say very experienced, staunch justice activists, human rights defenders, Hector Soliman, Denise Dora, Evashni Naidu. Thank you very much for joining us in this conversation. Thank you to our interpreters for helping make our conversation accessible to different groups. And thank you everyone for joining us here today, for engaging and asking questions.
Thank you. It's the first
Uh,
time to attend your conference.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we will be having other conversations similar to this. And one of those will be about youth engagement, about youth involvement in activism. So wait for further announcements, and we look forward to continuing this conversation in our future calls. As what we have heard from our speakers, we need to organize, reorganize, organize, and we don't walk alone. We learn from each other. We learn together, and we learn from organizations like the Black Sash and the 70 years of Black Sash being a testament to the commitment to justice. So let's work together and let's learn from each other through conversations like this and other events, other activities. Again, thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye for now.
Thank you, Marlon. Thank you, Hector, Evashan.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, colleagues. Bye.